Um, that what I want to leave you with is a question that I think is almost like a cosmic alignment. What are the very capacities that our children need to thrive in this new reality come in our responses to these present challenges that they face right now, that they face through the pandemic? And what if we could all experience this kind of post-pandemic growth as individuals, but also as schools, as communities, and as families?
Yes, good evening. Anya, I was thrilled with that presentation. The reason is that it was so very well balanced, and it really ended with an opportunity for our society to get together with a collective post-traumatic growth. As I define resilience, resilience is not only survival, but it's actually about learning how to thrive. I think that we need to put these models together. And I have to tell you that so much of what I've been doing in the last year is giving the counter message to the broad message of brokenness with which this generation is being brushed. And that's because, all of our great societies, meaning American Academy of Pediatrics, Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, have raised the alarm about the mental health crisis. Not only do I know that this crisis is real, but I'm working within it. I'm working within a hospital system that is overwhelmed with kids in crisis, and it's affecting their bodies deeply. So I am acutely aware that all of the scary numbers are scary, but I am deeply worried that the generation is being painted with a sense of brokenness, and that itself will do tremendous harm. And what I loved about your presentation is that it left me with both messages. There are serious problems, and the solutions can come from our response to those problems. And it didn't paint young people as broken. What you very clearly did is make the message that many of them were doing well to begin with, but you also gave them a tool to continue to do well, which is contribute to other people's lives. So kudos. Thank you. Thank you. It's this balance that we need. So with that said, let's think about some of the lessons that we are learning. We are learning that some kids did really well and some kids did really badly. And we're learning and shouldn't be surprised by the fact that some of this has to do with equity issues, things that have been hiding in plain sight. Functioning families, kids did better. Kids living in poverty, kids didn't do as well. I think this is a real opportunity for us to understand the urgent and imperative role that teachers play in kids' lives. When parents are highly stressed and dealing with survival issues on a daily basis, it's just hard to pay as much attention to what's going on within your home. That doesn't mean that they're any less loved. The love is the same. But when you are suffering and struggling for survival, your kids need other adults who can be present in their lives. And teachers have always filled that role. And when we separated teachers from kids, we saw the consequences. And that's a really, really big deal. The other thing is we have this opportunity to really advocate for growth within our families and growth within kids. And I'd like to talk about two issues. Within families, this has been a time of tremendous uncertainty. But where is it that kids learn resilience? Kids learn resilience when we model it. And we model it best during times of stress. So I've written a lot about this, and I think I've spoken to Glenbard about this in the last couple of years. But let's just give one example. Parents have been overwhelmed. Everybody, the most functioning human being on earth, has been handling more than they could normally handle, right? So we've always been juggling too many balls. That's called being alive and being human in this century. And parents have always had extra balls to juggle. And now what's happened? There have been extra balls. Now you're worried about the health of your loved ones. You're worried about the community. You're worried about how to navigate in a divisive world. There's so much stuff going on. You're trying to manage work in a different way and your kids' education in a different way. There are so many extra balls. And because none of us are perfect, we have all been dropping some of those balls. And this is a real opportunity for a reset. So when you've been juggling balls and some of them have stayed up in the air and many of them have dropped. Here's the opportunity. The opportunity is to look up at which balls have still been in the air. And then you say, these are the things that have always really mattered to me. And then you look down on the ground at the things that fell, and then you decide to leave some of them there. And rather than hating ourselves for the fact that we haven't been able to handle it all, we practice self-compassion and self-forgiveness. This is such a critical resilience tool, and our kids can learn it from us fantastically well now. And how does that also help our kids? That also helps our kids because our kids are discovering their own imperfections and their own unevenness. And they also are going to be having their own problems. And the question is, will they come to the parents when their displays of unevenness are call them failures, are showing themselves, or when they really need the emotional support? They will go to people who they know will not judge them and who will be compassionate and forgiving of them. So when we forgive ourselves for our imperfections and dropping the balls, our kids learn we are safe to come to. So self-compassion, self-forgiveness is not only a way of teaching resilience, it's a way of strengthening your family and making sure your kids use you. So just park that as one growth idea. Another growth idea I want to leverage what Anya said about the importance of contributing to the community. Well, you know what? When young people learn to contribute to the community, they learn how much they matter. Young people have a sense of meaning and purpose, thrive, right? But it's also more than that, right? When you give, you learn something. You learn that it feels good to give. And when you learn that it feels good to give, it means that at the time in the future when you're going to need to receive, which is coming for all of us, right? When you need to receive, you can do so without shame or stigma, because you know that the person who's giving you is not pitying you. Their aim is to serve, and it makes them feel good. We learn this lesson when we offer compassion, and when we offer compassion, we will more comfortably receive it in the future. And speaking of the future, I want to talk about this generation. I do not want this generation to be painted with the broad brush of brokenness of being mentally fragile. I can explain to you in detail during the question and answer period, if you want, about why adolescents were particularly vulnerable during these times. I can explain it in brain or developmental science too, so we all can be empathetic to what it is that happened to them. But you know what else happens to a generation? What happens to a generation is that they are imprinted with a basic way of looking at the universe based on their collective experience. We know this. While there's great variability within any population, you know, my grandparents, they were the Depression kids, right? And if they were the Depression kids, they were frugal throughout life. The World War II era kids felt like if we stuck together as a nation, we could get through anything. The kids who went through 9/11 as their major imprinting learned not to trust. What's going to happen now? The jury is out. But here's what I think could happen if the adults play our cards right. What has this generation experienced collectively? What they've experienced collectively is separation and isolation. This is the generation that couldn't hug their grandparents for a year. They couldn't learn together, pray together, or play together. What that means is that this generation could also be imprinted with the knowledge that human connection is what matters most. So when your last slide, Anya, said, perhaps from the problem arises the solution, except you said it more eloquently than that. But that's what your last slide said. I think that's exactly what could be happening now. Imagine, you know, our society, one of our biggest problems is that we haven't honored the elderly. Maybe this generation that was separated from their elders will learn again to venerate the elders and gather wisdom from the elders. This could be the generation that understands the power of human connection. You know what? You ended with an AI slide. AI terrifies me, but I know it is the future, but it isn't going to replace human connection. So perhaps this generation that's going to move so forward with technology, also being imprinted with the primacy and the power of human relationships, that understand that together we are fragile as a stick, but when we alone we're fragile as a stick, but when we join together, we're nearly unbreakable. If this generation learns that, they can move into a future and handle all the technology, but never forget the power of human connection. That's my hope, my dream, and I think it absolutely could be what comes out of the pandemic if we play our cards right. Don't paint them with a broad brush of brokenness, and really look at some of the broader messages that are happening in society that are about human division instead of human unity. We have to be wiser and understand what this generation is watching. With that, thank you again. And I also have to thank, I think the parents of Glenbard know how much I love this community. And Gilda, I think knows, but I've said publicly in many settings, is one of the human beings in this country I most admire as someone who's really bringing the best education to a community. So I'll take questions or take the backseat to Anya.
Anya, do you see how this goes? I only invite people that like me. See, that's it. And so I'm going to keep doing that, if that's okay. I had such a kick out of the two of you nodding when each of you spoke. What fun to see this interchange. We have a question from a student. Haley, take it away. And Anya, your chapter 9 on mental health is just wonderful. And so much of what Ken just said is right in chapter 9. So Haley, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Haley Nolan. I am a senior at Glenbard North High School. Since it is officially 1 year post-COVID, my question is, what suggestions do you have for me as a student, and how can I best help my friends as we transition back to full school days, sports, clubs, activities, and the normal teen stressors after COVID?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question. And thanks for listening and for asking that question. You know, there's such a huge transition. And I think, first of all, I think if I can think back to my own senior year, there's always a sense of time is running out, right? Your time is so limited and you want to do everything. And I'm sure that's only multiplied for you because of the time that you missed, right? Wanting to do absolutely everything. And so I think that there's also this sense of like, not only do you want to do everything, but you want to feel the way you're supposed to feel when you're doing it. Like everything is supposed to be so fun, so exciting.
Yeah.
Right. And so just being aware of that and acknowledging that, yes, you want to do everything, but you still have to sleep every day and you still have to manage your energy and prioritize, that it's going to be tricky to do that, but being as aware as you can and talking to your friends about the fact that it's going to be something that you need to manage. And you can't live 3 years in 1 year. That's just not going to be the case, right? But what you can do is you can be more present for the moments that you're in and try to pay as much attention as you can to those moments. And so practicing that, whatever makes you feel calm, whatever makes you feel focused, taking time out of your day for that, so that you will soak that up and you'll have the best memories that you can have because you'll really be present for it.
Thank you.
I just love that answer. There was so much wisdom there about making the most of every moment. And Haley, respectfully, it's not 1 year after COVID. We're still in the midst of COVID. But what has happened is we've adapted to a new reality. We have put together the best of science to figure out how to cope with this and how even largely to conquer it. There's a major lesson there, right? It's not over. It's that human beings have grown and adapted. And that's the same thing I would say to anyone in your generation. Yeah, have fun, because youth is about having fun. But you know what else it's about? It's about being idealistic and being committed to repair the world. And if you guys have paid a lot of attention, the adults have not been doing a very good job recently. And I personally am counting on you and your generation. Not too much pressure. You have time. You have time to come up with the solutions. But that's part of what you should be talking about is, how do we support each other? How is it that in the last couple of years, there have been many issues around equity that have been hiding in plain sight, but are no longer hiding? How do we build a world that is more equitable? How do we build a world in which People who are struggling with emotional health issues feel welcome to grow and to recover without shame or stigma. That's the other great thing that could come out of this generation, Haley. You know, I'm way old, right? I'm 60, and when I was your age, I was seriously depressed and no one knew it because it wasn't cool 43 years ago to say that. Thank goodness that because of our attention to the well-being of young people, we can talk about feelings, we can support each other through those feelings without shame or stigma, and even begin to recognize that the young people who feel the most, who are deeply sensitive, who sometimes get sad, end up being the coolest and most wonderful adults because feeling is awesome.
Definitely agree. Thank you so much.
Peter Monahan, principal of Glenbard West, I believe you have a question.
Thank you. First of all, I'll just start with a couple, just two quick comments. One is the COVID years, to me, really highlighted the importance of our staff and our staff being student-centered. And I was super proud of our teachers and their resiliency and their adaptability and throughout all of it. And it goes without saying that I was also and have been really amazed at the resiliency and the toughness of our students and how they have battled back from this. Having said that, the thing that stood out to so many of us when we went through this was the disparity with so many of our families and our students who didn't have the same kind of resources at home. Many of our, Glenbard as a district has, a significant percentage of families who are low income families and whose parents both might work and they don't have, the same kind of luxuries that other students might have at home. And so we found that the COVID experience for us had an even harsher impact on families that were already disadvantaged. And I just wonder, like, as we come out of that, as we move away from that and move into a different space, because I don't know if it's going back to where we were, if either of the speakers have recommendations and things for us to continue to think about related to that.
I mean, this is a huge theme of my book, as I talk about how the pandemic revealed these longstanding inequities in our society, everything from the 30 million kids that depend on school meals to the kids who depend on schools for a safe place to be during the day, and a place where there's caring adults, as Ken spoke to. So now that we know this, what do we do about it? I do see a lot of schools working on forming partnerships or strengthening their partnerships with community groups to make sure that there isn't a family in their community that's not connected to all the resources that are there, that are available, and making sure that that's help is out there, that families are, again, don't have the stigma of taking advantage of it. But I don't believe that's something that schools can do alone. So what I'd also would love to see is a little more collective action. We became very close during the pandemic, and we actually passed in the short term some of the things that we're going to need if we want to reduce family poverty, like having a child tax credit. So that was there, but only temporarily. So how do we return to that, whether on the state level, city level, or national level, as a policy that's going to flat out prevent family poverty through cash transfer? To me, that's a very simple thing that we could be doing, and schools could certainly be involved in the advocacy that would be necessary to get there.
I just find myself agreeing with Anya so much, and it's such a privilege to hear her responses. I get stopped a lot because I'm a resilience guy and I write books on resilience. And especially about a year ago, I was being asked by friends and strangers on email, will things ever be the same? And they were hoping that, this like resilience positive guy was going to go, things are going to be terrific. And my answer actually is, I hope not. Because Dr. Monahan, inequities and disparities are not new. They've always existed. they just became really, really clear from even the first moments of the pandemic, when the kids who had a home computer were able to thrive compared to the kids who didn't. The kids with resources were able to do better. So they just got kind of magnified and made a lot of people aware of things that always existed. So what I really hope is that if we're going to live up to our values as a nation, we do create the policies and the programs so that we work so that every young child, every young person can take advantage of the educational setting to thrive and to grow. So yes, you're absolutely correct. What you saw was real. And now all teachers, by definition of bearing witness, become the people who can help society understand this reality even better.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
There is a question here about, you both spoke about this too, about the importance of this understanding, this ability this skill we need relating to others. Can you speak to some suggestions for parents, how they can help their children reestablish that after being isolated?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I see this concern coming from parents a lot, that they feel that their kids, missed a couple of years basically in their social development, and they're not quite sure how to reestablish those friendships, or they're not quite sure where they fit in socially, which is a pretty common experience anyway. And it's not something I think the parents of adolescents are that used to in most cases, like having to manage their kids' social lives or help them overcome social anxiety, except in certain cases. And so I really want to hear what Ken has to say about it. But I mean, I think for me, it's interesting to think about how different kinds of structured, formal and informal settings can help contribute to our children's sense of ease and so their social development. So, definitely in the family, learning, like just basically taking turns in conversation at family meals, definitely in school when teachers are conscious about how they offer social opportunities, certain kinds of clubs and organizations. The summer camp that I send my daughter to is very, very good on sort of conscious kindness and conscious ways of relating, so that children can have a social experience that is very safe and mediated in that way. So they're all different kinds. There's religious communities, if you have your church or your synagogue or your temple or whatever it is that you go to. So there's all different kinds of ways that kids can have positive social experiences, and we can help enrich their environments.
The question brings up a really interesting issue. The assumption is that when all kids went back to school, that there would just be celebrations and that all kids are going to be excited to be with their friends. And what was missed is that for a lot of kids who have anxiety in social settings, they actually were more comfortable at home, and that going back to school can be the difficulty for some kids. So let's talk about all kids. Every adolescent is going through the fundamental questions of identity formation. Who am I? And when they're trying to figure out who they are, the questions that they draw from are, am I normal and how do I fit in? That's all kids. Because of that, kids tend to get stuck into kind of boxes. This is the group I am in, this is who I am, and my normalcy can be defined by your not being normal. In other words, adolescence can be tough. It can be tough for kids with social anxiety, and it can be tough for all young people, no matter how much they're thriving socially, which is why all adolescents should have multiple circles of friends as a protective mechanism. Because during adolescence, many people change peer groups, and you never want your kid to be isolated or alone. That is why, in preparation to go back to school and just life, it's good for your kids to have extended family, sibling relationships, religious affiliation, boys and girls club, community organizations, sports, whatever it is. Every kid should have 2 or 3 different groups that they can travel between, so that they're not defined singularly by how one peer group chooses to see them that week. Highly protective for all kids. For the kid who has social anxiety, who's really having trouble getting back to school, then the answer is starting with extended family if they have them, a couple of neighborhood kids, and just one or two kids that they can walk home from school with or sit with at lunch. Like planning ahead, something as simple as I'm going to sit with you at lunch alleviates an enormous amount of anxiety when you're going back to a large setting.
Perfect.
And following up on that comes a question about the balance of pushing your child and not pushing your child. Several questions came up about that. Take it away.
So I think one of the gifts of the pandemic was that the rat race, the carousel, the conveyor belt that everybody has been on towards some imaginary vision of success stopped, and the noise stopped. And if we were lucky, we had a chance to really think about what was important, what was the most important for us. And now that things have started up again, I hope that families take this opportunity to really rethink their approach and not to do what they would define as pushing their kids. Because, you know, what we want from our kids when they're 32, right? I once talked to a school leader who was like, parents come to my office and I ask them about their 32-year-old child. They're coming to me to talk about 17-year-old, but I want to talk about the 32-year-old. Do you want a 32-year-old who has a perfect GPA on their college transcript? Or do you want someone who is happy, healthy, balanced, has a good relationship, is engaged in their community, and has found work that they enjoy, right? And what are the parenting styles or the types of interaction you can have with your kids in your very few remaining years with them, right? You don't have that much more time to be the direct person in their lives in this way. What is the approach that's really going to be the most successful long-term? I would hope and I would think, and I mean, my daughter's in 6th grade, so I'm at the very beginning of this. I know nothing at all, but I would hope and I would think that we're moving toward a time of sharing responsibility with our kids and helping them take responsibility for their lives and internalize their own goals. And everything that we do should be somehow pointed in that direction, where we're helping them think about, what do I want? Why am I doing this? Why is it important to me? And to me, anything that is pushing is not necessarily serving that goal if we define it as being pushing.
Anya, we should really connect. Like virtually every one of my books has a chapter on raising 35-year-olds, right? So we're just off by 3 years, but always. Let's actually back up. I very much agree with everything Anya said, except for one sentence that I completely and fundamentally disagree with, which is when you said we have only a few years with our child. The time that our children are being raised in our house is relatively fleeting, but our goal is lifelong interdependence, right? And I can tell you, as someone who has 27-year-olds, I'm closer to them than I've ever been, and I've always been close. It is glorious and it is wonderful. And when we parent in a way that allows kids to find themselves, that allows them to feel independent within our households, they will launch into adulthood secure and want lifelong interdependence with us. So that's the good news. Your kid's going into 6th grade. You got 6 more years in your house and 50 more years with your kid, maybe 80 more years. So with that said, here's what we know about resilience. We know that young people are resilient when there's at least one adult, more is better, who believe in them without condition and hold them to high expectation. The critical question here is, what is high expectation? As long as we think high expectation is pushing about grades or trophies or scores or results, we're not going to raise kids who know that they are unconditionally loved. We're going to raise kids who are always performing for the adult in their life. But when we understand that high expectations is not about what your kid performs, but who your kid is. Nobody knows your kid like you do. Their real character strengths, their generosity, their integrity, their compassion, their sense of humor, their stubbornness, all the things you love about your kids. When you hold them to that expectation, You remain their North Star. They will live up to being themselves because you're pushing them to be themselves, not to perform, but you know who they really are. And knowing who they really are is what unconditional love is. That's what makes kids be able to navigate the peer groups. You know, the person who knows me the most, everything's good about me, everything's messed up. My mom, she still loves me. That's the conversation we want inside their head, right? That is what you are holding them to high expectations for. Remember this line, if you remember nothing else from anything I've ever said. The reason we love kids is so that they know that they are worthy of being loved. That's about knowing who they are, not what they do.
Both of you touched on the importance of communicating with our child that this is something we have not experienced, that empathy, have that compassion for this experience. We can relate to their test taking, they're going to the prom, but the experience of living through COVID as a teenager, as a child, is something we cannot relate to. And as I said, both of you have touched upon this. So maybe some communication techniques. How can we best share that with the children? We really are listening. We really are empathetic to what they've experienced.
Yeah, I think this is really a tough one, as our kids are naturally in this process of wanting to create their own space and define themselves possibly in contrast to us. And so kind of rushing in, it's a difficult line to walk there sometimes between giving them space and letting know that you're around. I think there's something to be said for sort of the unobtrusive approach of making yourself available physically and knowing that there's, I hear a lot of parents talk about the importance of, like, if you're able to, like, driving your kids around and listening, because that's a place where they can talk and kind of look, not have to look straight at you, or they can talk to their friends and you can kind of like lightly know what's going on. And so making yourself available, because so many of us are buried as well in our own work and our own concerns, that there's a sense of openness. And then when the moment is right, that you'll be able to kind of like drop in, I think is one way of looking at it. But Ken, I'm sure you have other ideas.
That's actually would have been the first thing that I would have said, is to just be available on their own timeline. But if you wanted, Gilda, as you know, a lot of times in some of my books, I have like, say this, not that, right? So don't say, I understand. Do say, I can't imagine, or help me to understand, right? Because what that says, it's one of the core principles of positive youth development, is understanding that kids are the expert in their own lives. And that's true if the kid's 5. It's true if your kid's 25. They're still the experts in their own lives. But you know what we got? We got the wisdom of experience. So that doesn't exclude us from supporting them, but it means it's always a partnership. Help me understand what's going on in your life, and I can draw from the experiences I do have, perhaps to guide you. But the other thing, if I get asked a question more than anything from parents in a crisis situation or not, it begins usually with, what do I say when? And my answer is, your words matter less. Listening matters more. It's showing up for your kid, being present and listening, and then being a sounding board. Because when we're sounding boards, it's amazing how wise these kids are if we let them solve some of their own issues. You're on, Gilda.
A couple of questions that came in about this similar topic about, it really sounds like parents are struggling, and climate change, global upheaval, on the heels of the pandemic. How do I best help my child?
Yeah, I love this question. It's something that I did a Life Kit episode about. I've done a couple of Life Kit episodes about this, actually. One that we reran a bunch of times is what to say to kids when the news is scary. But I mean, first of all, there's things we can all do in terms of our information hygiene as well as our information literacy. So, it's very easy for us and for our kids to be overwhelmed with hot takes and sort of the latest outrage of the moment and feel like there's absolutely nothing that's good in the world. And so letting your kids see what your news habits are, if it's, 10 minutes of NPR in the morning, or if it's reading the New York Times on paper, where there's a concrete amount of it and it's not endless, I think can be very helpful. And then, making yourself available, obviously, to talk to them about things, because we are all subject to distortions of reality and making things bigger than they are. And I think if kids are on TikTok or they're listening to their friends, they may see things that are really blown up out of proportion, or they're exaggerated in terms of their effects. And we need to help our kids kind of be able to sort fact from fiction. A very, very good rule of thumb about information literacy is, how does that make you feel? So if you're reading something that gets you really hot and you want to tell someone right away, or it makes you mad, it makes you want to share it, it makes you really excited, that is a signal that is information that was concocted to create that experience, to create that reaction from you. And that's just a basic information literacy connection that our kids need to be able to make, right? And they might be learning it in their English classes, but they can also learn it from you. That said, there's some very difficult truths in the world that we live in. And the ultimate strategy that works, obviously, we need information literacy, we need emotional literacy to know when to take a break, to know how to take care of ourselves, how to calm down, how to process the stress, when it's enough, when enough is enough. I would slip in there that I know for me, it's not good to look at my phone late at night or first thing in the morning. We don't want our teens to be doing that either, whether for information purposes or whether it's their text messages. And then the last thing I would say is, what is the antidote to the despair at the state of the world is our sense of agency and purpose. What are we doing to engage? How are we as a family? How are they as students, as budding young leaders, engaged in making the world a better place? What are those outlets? And I see many, many families who are really, during the pandemic and before, and now since, who make a family a point of that, whether it's, small organizations that you support, or service projects that you do, or ways that you help, it could be cleaning up the park or the beach, but things that make the world better is the antidote to despair.
That sounded like a prayer to me. That was such a beautiful response. I would just like to add a couple of things. Adolescents are inherently idealistic. Adolescence is inherently about thinking about how to repair the world. And yet many adults instinctively shut adolescents down, particularly when they're being idealistic, particularly when they're pointing out problems. And we have all of these mythologies that we throw out about kids, like kids are selfish. Kids don't think about the future. Not true. Kids are anything but self-centered. They're really the people who are committed to repairing the world, who see the tragedies that we've learned to avert our eyes to. And we shut them down because their truths scare us. That is not the thing to be doing. The thing to be doing is to developing their agency, because we need them. All right. The next thing, the other point that I would add is that it really is a developmental question, right? It's about your child's age, but also about what they can handle in the moment, right? A young child, or a child who's in tremendous crisis, is thinking concretely, seeing things exactly as they are, and they want really nothing more than to be told they're safe. So a young child in times of crisis wants to see you as the duck gliding effortlessly on the water. They just want to draw their sense of security from you. They don't want complexity. And even people in crisis, which, as you know, is much of what I do, people in crisis just need that sense of security for the moment. But if you have an adolescent and you look like the duck gliding on the water, you are wasting an opportunity to help them grow, because it doesn't look real and they're not learning. So what you want to be for the adolescent is, you still want to be the duck gliding on the water, but the only reason you're gliding is because your little feet are underneath paddling like crazy. And when we show adolescents what we're doing to paddle to stay afloat, that is how they grow from us.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful, right, Anya? Beautiful. Thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you, Ken, for your wisdom and sharing your thoughts about Anya's wonderful book. Pick up a copy of Ken's book. Congrats, you're having a tea next month. And of course, he'll be back to talk about it as well. Thank you, Peter Monahan, for the introductions. Thank you, Haley, for your question. Thank you, parents, for listening in. I'm so grateful for this hour. Thank you, everybody. Take care and be well.